Greetings, everyone. Please take a seat. So on behalf of the Kofi Annan Foundation, the European Federation of Journalists and Reporters Without Borders, I'm pleased to welcome you here to the Press Club of Brussels for this important discussion on the implementation of the European Media Freedom Act, more commonly known in Brussels parlance as EMFA, which you've heard about. The first question I was often asked is, why now? Why have a discussion on EMFA now when the EMFA has just been passed? Well, without wishing to be unduly Churchillian, it's just the end of the beginning, because in fact the most difficult phase will be in the coming months when we try and implement this new ambitious European Media Freedom Act. And we've got with us today a distinguished panel of experts from very important organizations for this next phase, who will be sharing their views and also exchanging with you. So I'm your MC, Sebastian Whitechurch-Rack from the Kofi Annan Foundation. I just want to give you a little running order. We'll start with some opening remarks by the three representatives of the organizations which are co-organizing this event. We'll then have a keynote intervention by Vice President Jourova, who unfortunately couldn't join us in person, but she has sent a representative who is in the room, and also a little intervention recorded message regarding this issue. Then we'll have a panel discussion. And finally, we'll leave a good chunk of time for an exchange with the audience. And I know this is not an ordinary audience. I know many of you are very personally involved, committed, and engaged in these debates with permanent missions, civil society organizations, regulators. So I know you're as much part of the discussion as part of the audience. Before we start, let me just get some housekeeping issues over and done with. First of all, I'd be grateful if you could turn off your phones, or at least turn the volume off. Secondly, be aware this event is live streamed. And finally, for the journalists among you, if you want, some of the speakers will be available after the event to answer perhaps questions you may still have. So with that done, without further ado, I call on Mrs. Corinne Momal-Vanian, the Executive Director of the Foundation, to say a few opening remarks, and then we'll follow with the European Federation of Journalists and Reporters Without Borders. Please, Madame Momal-Vanian.
Merci, Sébastien. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and really what better venue than the Press Club, obviously, to have this discussion on what is affectionately known as the EMFA, as I just learned. So thank you, Laurent, for having us, for hosting us. And quite frankly, the Kofi Annan Foundation is more accustomed to working in Abuja or Kuala Lumpur or Mexico City than in Brussels. But we've come to realize in recent years that the EU is really a key actor and a central platform in global efforts to shore up democracy around the world. So here we are, present, active in Brussels. You can expect us to be more and more visible. Sebastian is already a fixture of the landscape here in Brussels. So here we are, and we know that democracy is under pressure or under attack, actually, globally. We've all seen the dispiriting series of statistics put out by International IDEA, by a variety of democracies, that show that decades of progress in advancing democracy have simply been wiped out. That we're back to the levels of democracy that we had in the 1980s, and I remember the 1980s, and it wasn't a very democratic time. So research has shown that freedom of association, freedom of the media are often the first victims of the authoritarian drift. So it's a canary in the coal mine, really, and the treatment of the media is really a key indicator of the democratic health of a country. And there's a quote by Kofi Annan that I really like that really talks about this. It says, "Where a free press is imperiled, muzzled, or banned altogether, every other freedom is limited to, and democracy itself is threatened," end of quote. And he was a great defender of the freedom of the press. He was also particularly fond of political cartoons, and some of you may know that every 2 years the Freedom Cartoonist Foundation gives out a Kofi Annan Courage in Cartooning Award. That was awarded just on 3rd of May in Geneva to two fantastic cartoonists. So Kofi Annan was also prescient in his concern about the rise of disinformation, digital threats to democracy, and the role of social media in sowing distrust and divides in our societies. And although he may not maybe he may not have quite imagined or predicted the full extent to which AI could boost, would and could boost disinformation, or the use of intrusive surveillance software against media and journalists. And the EU may be the world's last real bastion of democracy, or many of us like to think so here. But these threats play out here as well in Europe, in full, especially, of course, in these weeks, electoral weeks. But even before this electoral time, there were very worrying signs that have to be recognized and addressed if the EU is to continue to speak credibly of democratic values and processes. And the 2022 Rule of Law report, the Mapping Media Freedom platform, show that press freedom is declining across the continent, while the Media Pluralism Monitor reveals troubling trends. In particular, media market plurality is at risk in certain member states, especially online. And the results also point out to the lack of transparency in media ownership. So we know that in individual EU member states address pluralism and media freedom in their national legislation, obviously. But media freedom had not, until recently, been given an effective legal framework of its own at the continental level, and until the European Media Freedom Act, the famous EMFA. So all of us gathered here surely hope that EMFA will be a game changer, that it will achieve its objectives of strengthening the market, editorial freedom of media companies, protecting them from unjustified national measures, protecting the pluralism of European media landscape. But as we will discuss this afternoon, much will depend, in fact, on its implementation at the national level. And we are here, therefore, to discuss what is at stake, how EMFA will work, and to set the stage for the challenges to come. So, indeed, I think the timing is right, Sebastian. And we at the Kofi Annan Foundation are not the experts, so I'm very grateful to Reporters Without Borders, European Federation of Journalists, and all of you for being with us today and for your guidance in preparing this event. And it's enough for me. I'll leave the floor to the experts now. Thank you.
And now could I call on Renate Schröder from the European Federation of Journalists, please.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see so many people here this afternoon. You probably all know that we have been on stage quite often. Wouter and I are laughing because we wonder how to be innovative still. Since been over 2 years, we have been working very heavily on this European Media Freedom Act we call EMFA, at least those who are in Brussels. The other day somebody said, what is EMFA? How can they dare to ask something like that? Anyway, this EMFA baby was now finally adopted on the 7th of May, or it's been in the official journal, and is supposed to be enforced by August next year. And we all know, or most of us know, that it is sort of a historical act. And why that? I think because it's for the first time that there is, at European level, a regulation with direct national effect dealing with all media, not only the audiovisual media, but also the print media, which is always very sensible when it comes to regulation, because print media, of course, is part of the self-regulatory scheme. And it's for the first time a sort of holistic approach to media, which we have been saying for the last 15 years, journalism is a public good. I said to Renate just a while ago that 15 years ago, nobody was interested in that. They were like, these journalists, these unions, what are they talking about? This is really, why a public good? Now, with all the reasons you just explained, I think more and more realize, yes, journalism is a public good, and it's like a little flower that has to be planted, it has to be protected, it has to be regulated. There are many new enemies, there are many new forces. We all know it. We have elections coming up this weekend. We're all afraid that some parties who are maybe not that interested in the European integration, who are not that interested in rule of law, in fundamental rights, and in media freedom, may take too much power, at least in our view. So we are happy we got this little flower just in time, maybe too late, I hope not. And now, and that's why we will be meeting each other, unfortunately or fortunately, for the coming year, quite often again, because now it's a question of enforcement. We all know a regulation by itself is not enough. It has to be enforced, and for that we need political will. And this again is a big question mark, very much related who is governing at the moment. I'm just coming back from Italy, where we led a press media freedom mission. Many problems there, including on public service media, including on the independence of public service media, on the financial sustainability. We will discuss it very soon because it's part of the EMFA. So yeah, I don't want to say a lot. I want to thank the Kofi Annan Foundation for having given us this possibility, together with our friends RSF, to be here today and start, hopefully, a new exciting journey to make the historical act a historical, practical experience. We have a new logo, I'm sorry to say, but next time it will be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renata. And finally, Antoine Bernard, the Director of Advocacy from Reporters Without Borders, please.
Bonjour, good afternoon, buenas tardes. Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, KFA. Thank you very much, EFJ. Thank you very much to you for making it. So many familiar faces, like if we have been through a common journey around this EMFA voyage. So great to be here, text talk, understand where we are and the way forward. And the way forward, that's in the title for our event today. In fact, just looking backward 5 years, what amazing 5 years. Unprecedented 5 years. Digital Services Act, Code of Practice Soon Conduct Against Disinformation, Anti-SLAPP Directive. I mean, not a little thing, even though we're always frustrated. So we are frustrated with the scope, but Anti-SLAPP Directive, EMFA now, recommendations, etc., unprecedented. And we need, and this is RSF saying it, usually we would protest and criticize and denounce. We want to pay tribute. We want to pay tribute in particular in the Commission to Vera Jourova and the energy that she and the Commission has put into it. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us today, but you will hear from the message she sent to us. Again, a clear sign of her permanent commitment for concrete advances, concrete move forwards, so as to protect journalists and media freedom. Now, RSF wouldn't be RSF, and we wouldn't be together if we were all just happy. Of course we're not. Of course we're not. Okay, we've moved very far, not as far as we would have liked, CF Article 4, but anyway, we've moved very far on the protection of journalists. Okay, we've been moving on media freedom. Okay, we've been moving on regulators, independence, getting together. Yes, but let's look at our daily life, just our daily life, and see how much danger we as EU citizens and beyond are encountering, and our democracies, in particular, from what's coming from platforms. How disinformation, propaganda, foreign interference, manipulation of information has become daily in our democracies. So, yes, we do think and are fully aware, as Renate said, that there is now opening the implementation challenge, obviously. And we have with us, as we will hear from the Commission, from Renate, we will hear from Frederic and a regulator, we will hear, yes. But also we are very aware, and this is RFSF's move forward, that we need to keep on moving. We need to have the EU keeping on moving, sending signals. Beyond the mere protection of journalists and media freedom, we think it is time to launch and feed a citizen's right to information, to trustworthy information, a right to trustworthy information. That beyond journalist protection, let's imagine a world, an EU, where journalists would be just safe. No more murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia, no more murder of Jan Kuciak, no more murder, etc. Imagine a world where media would be independent. No tycoon capture, no it yet on platforms. They would keep journalistic information, trustworthy sources of information, be pushed to the margins, because we know how it works. And we think due diligence imposed to platform is only risk mitigation. And daily life shows how much this is not enough. We think in particular in the field of media sustainability, how to counter unfair competition suffered by trustworthy media just from the functioning of algorithm and put it back at least to fair competition, if not by imposing amplification of trustworthy sources of information. Second, AI. And we know how much AI Act does not identify information as potentially a high risk. So there is work to be done. And we know political wording, political narrative, like 27, 28 June, European Council to come, setting up the priorities for the next 5 years, is a key moment for head of states and government to send signals. Yes, the right to trustworthy information, our citizens' right to information, is absolutely key and will be on the agenda. So that's the way forward, we hope. We hope you will share, and that navigating the implementation challenge for EMFA will not be the end of the journey, but indeed, it's a new beginning for the continuation of the journey. Have a good meeting.
Thank you very much, Antoine. And now, Jess, if you don't mind, we're going to listen to Mrs. Jourova's comments. And let me also say that we actually invited Ms. Jourova to partake in this event before we had brought in the European Federation of Journalists. So in the remarks, she's not going to explicitly thank the European Federation of Journalists because she recorded these remarks beforehand. But let me thank the European Federation of Journalists for being involved with us. So please, Jess, if you don't mind putting on the video. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to open this roundtable. I would like to thank Reporters Without Borders and the Kofi Annan Foundation for organizing this event and for their work to protect human rights. By joining forces, we have made incredible progress over the past years. Media freedom has never been so high on the agenda of the European Union. The first ever EU law to protect the independence of the Media Freedom Act, has just entered into force. This law would not have been possible without the participants here today, and I would like to thank you. The Media Freedom Act is a response to very real threats to the media that we have identified across the European Union. Each article is a practical solution to a concrete problem. With the Act, we put for the first time in EU law that states should not interfere in editorial decisions. We introduce safeguards so that no journalist can be spied on for doing their work and no public service media can become a propaganda channel of one party. We require transparency of media ownership and transparency and fairness in the allocation of state advertising. We ask the media themselves to take measures to protect editorial independence and disclose conflicts of interest. We are creating new mechanisms to strengthen the cooperation among media regulators so that they can deal with threats such as Russian propaganda in a stronger way. Finally, we propose more safeguards to protect media content in the online environment. The Media Freedom Act goes hand in hand with two other key initiatives: a new directive against abusive litigation targeting journalists and recommendations to improve the safety of journalists. Ladies and gentlemen, journalists are in the front line to inform us. We saw it with the COVID pandemic, we see it with Russia's war against Ukraine, and with elections in the EU and across the world. We need independent media to bring us facts and to report on the ground. There is no democracy without journalists, and it is the duty of democracies to protect them. This is why the European Union has adopted this totally new legal framework to protect media freedom. Rules are created to be enforced. New rights should be used and defended. There is still important work ahead of us. The next steps involve the effective implementation of the Media Freedom Act. This includes ensuring that its principles are embedded into national laws and other EU policies. Further work will also include setting up the European Board for Media Services. The Media Freedom Act will apply as of August 2025. We are all awaiting its effect. We should also address other challenges that the media sector is facing. Several questions need to be answered. How can we address the risks of AI for journalism? How can we assure the economic sustainability of the media sector? The European Union has started to work on answers, along with like-minded partners across the world, but more will need to be done, and I am looking forward to your ideas. I wish you fruitful discussions, and let's continue working together to improve the protection of media freedom and of our democracies.
What a fantastic speech. It's a shame she couldn't be here in person, but we have Marie Frenet, who works with her personally on these issues, who's here with us today. So I'll see that as a worthy representative. So without further ado, I call now on the panelists to come on stage with me for the next phase of this discussion. So I call on Mrs. Renate Nicolai, who's Deputy Director General of DG Connect. Please. We didn't put any names. Please feel wait. Then I also call on Mr. Frédéric Bocobza from the ARCOM, Director. Oula.
Thank you. All good.
So sometimes the ARCOM has to pour cold water on hot, pressing issues.
I missed you. On the commission. Sorry.
On the Commission.
Never on the commission.
So Frédéric is the Deputy Director General of the ARCOM, which is the French media regulator. Then I call upon, of course, Renate Schröder, one of our co-organizers from the European Federation of Journalists. And then from Reporters Without Borders, I please call on Mrs. Varis-Jack. Julie. I've been practicing all morning, but apparently. Julie Mazurjak, who is the representative of Reporters Without Borders here in Brussels and follows this file very closely. And last but not least, I call on Wouter Gekire, who's from the European Broadcasting Union. which is the Public Broadcasting Union of Europe. And I'm now going to move to the panel myself. I'm afraid you'll have to put up with me a few moments longer because I'm also moderating this discussion. So basically, the running order will be as follows. I'll ask each of the panelists to give me their first impressions of the EMFA, why they think it's significant, and particularly why it's important to them and their organizations. And then we'll have a discussion on the questions, and then we'll finally open up the floor up to discussion with you, since I know that all of you are, as I said, stakeholders in this, and not just a passive audience, but you're actually personally, or many of you are personally involved in these debates. So without further ado, and I think we should start with maybe the Commission's response, perhaps we'll go in that order, in fact, just to keep it simple. Maybe Mrs. Nicolai can kick us off and give us her impressions of why this EMFA is so significant and what it changes to her work. In the years go ahead.
Well, I guess we heard the Commission kind of, vision very well, from Vera Jourova, who was my former boss, as some of you might know. I think let's look at, what this means for us now in DG Connect and in the Commission. This is a huge kind of, challenge for us as kind of the one to kind of support the effective enforcement. I think this is also very much acknowledged in our system. I think we are also well equipped to do so because we are at the moment already with the other digital rules like the DSA and the DMA showcasing quite well how we really want to make a difference with laws. De facto, this Commission has shown that we take up challenges, be they to democracy, be they to the digitalization. EMFA falls in the middle of that. We have shown that we really mean it by taking rather ambitious and decisive enforcement actions. The EMFA system will be slightly different because, we will, and the Commission, on the one hand, have a supporting role to kind of, support the board. But the board is also a new structure. It's not, only the national regulators that kind of continue in the structure that we have right now with ERGA to meet, to have good discussions, but the board brings them in a rather, enforcer's role also to really, look at the possibilities and the powers that we have kind of, reflected in the EMFA. So the board can, if something goes wrong in a member state through a national measure, for instance, come up with an opinion that can be quite important, whether that's a national measure that kind of, puts questions on ownership, on editorial independence, on market concentration, on state advertising, you name it. And that's a powerful tool. And the Commission will certainly assist and support that very powerfully in the Secretariat, whilst, of course, keeping a distance, because that's the independent kind of, board that will kind of, take these initiatives. And then, of course, the Commission will also watch, because now we have EU law. And it's not excluded that that EU law, once infringed, can also be looked by us as the European Commission as guardian of the treaty in that context. So in the toolbox that we have, compared to where we are now, where we have the annual rule of law report, which is important to point, kind of to mark, to kind of signpost, I think we will all be, in the whole kind of ecosystem, be better equipped to address developments early on, with a lot of pressure, peer pressure, opinions by the board, in my view, will have a huge political pressure for member states. And then also, finally, the potential enforcement measures by the Commission when it comes to infringement. So this is a game-changing moment where we really have to show that we mean it. As I just said, we have done in other pieces. I think just watch us in the coming months. We will start very, very soon to build the structures. I think we have in particular to build the board structure. That has to be done already early next year, so that by August next year, everything is in place. I've just been very involved in the digital service board structure. I know what it takes to kind of, bring a club together. And I think also there we really want to be a supportive helping hand from the side of the Commission to make that work.
Thank you, Dr. Nicolai. I think it's a very good segue to our next speaker, Frédéric Bokobza, who please refrain from pouring any more water on Dr. Nicolai and tell us as how, for a national regulator, what it means, this special oversight board created by EMFA.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, thank you very much to the organizers for the invitation. It's a very timely moment indeed to discuss EMFA and its future implementation. So yeah, I'm here. I actually work for the French audiovisual regulator ARCOM, but I'm here really on behalf of ERGA, so taking an European view on the subject. I think everybody is familiar with ERGA, or are you? Yeah. Okay. So we are basically 27 independent national regulators for audiovisual, although a number of us are increasingly involved in also digital regulation, and a very high number of us do have now responsibilities as competent authority pursuant to the DSA. And it's, I think, quite important to note that because we know, and it has been also recalled during the introduction, the tight links that there are between media and these big platforms and all the threats or risks that we have to mitigate. So this being said, what really is common ground for us is audiovisual media regulation. And actually, let me quote just the page 1 of ERGA's statement of purpose, which I think sums it up very well. We start by referring to the core democratic, economic, social and cultural values and the objectives enshrined in the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which was the text that created us as a body. And of course now we'll take over with EMFA with lots of new things to do, and we will come back to it in a moment. But I think these core values were and will stay what we look at when we act on a daily basis. So that explains why we've been from the very outset very strong supporters of the European Media Freedom Act, even before the Commission actually did table its proposal. We were contributing to the preliminary works, and we've been contributing throughout the discussions around the text, especially mindful of the independence, which, as Renate recalled, is something absolutely key to our action. So now, how do we feel about EMFA and the result? Well, unsurprisingly, we warmly welcomed the text when it was finally adopted. We're very satisfied because, well, first it went through. It was not so obvious from the beginning with the time that we had for this. And I have to say we're really thankful to the co-legislators and to the Commission for the constant drive and political willingness that they have shown on this. And we are really happy because, yeah, it's a game changer, we think, for Europe, clearly. Of course, it's not the perfect text. We put forward a number of proposals. Some of them were taken over, some of them not. But there is no such thing as a perfect compromise, as we all know. But what matters is that, turning to the future, we now have a basis to make things better. So, as Renate said, ERGA will transform early next year into the European Board for Media Services. By the way, we have to find an easy name for this because it's really not nice. I mean, EMFA works, but EBMS, that really doesn't work. Okay, the board, maybe, yeah. So yeah, we're getting ready for this. That's already February next year, and indeed most of the provisions of EMFA will be into application already in August next year, and it's a lot. So, and we're happy it's a lot because there's a lot to do, but it means also a lot of preparatory work. And for us as well, if I may, it will be a huge challenge. We are getting ready already now. It doesn't rely only on us. It will take preparation, which we are doing. It will also take adequate national legislative frameworks, and this is what is getting prepared now, we hope, everywhere. And it will also require resources. And I would say both at national level, because there will be new tasks put on national regulators, and at the European level, and that will, in this, we will, as the future board, indeed rely on the resources put forward by the Commission for the Secretariat. And here as well, we have expectations simply because the text shows high and relevant expectations. So that will be my conclusion for this first round of speeches. Thank you.
Please, Renate Schröder, want to add something? Please give us your take.
Hello? Yes. You are very lucky sitting between two Renates.
I am indeed.
No, sorry. Yes, what is important? I said already before, call it historic or whatever, we have something which has political value. Yet to be seen if it really has practical value for the situations in our member states. And for that, as I also said, the enforcement will be so crucial. And I think what also will be important, because the board, I call it the board, will not be responsible specifically for the articles which are very important for us, which is Article 4, dealing with protection of sources and protection from spyware, as Antoine rightly said. It could have been worse, but it could have been much better. And we also have to see how in those member states who have very good protections, that it will not get worse, because the text is not as good as we would have liked it to be. In theory, of course, when you ask what is important for you, protection of sources, protection from spyware is utterly important for journalists. And we are not sure if we get what we need with that. Article 5, but I think Wouter will talk more about it, is extremely important also for the European Federation of Journalists. The question of independence of public service media, the question also of financial sustainability of public service media is important in all member states. We had some member states telling us, well, this is not an issue for us. Sorry, but it will be an issue everywhere. So yet again to be seen how the wording, which is maybe not as concrete enough, will help us. Article 6 for the EFJ, of course, very important. Article 6.1 deals with the transparency of media ownership. As we know, in so many member states, we have oligarchs, we have obscure ownership structures with different interests. So we need to know who is behind each media, and that will be very important. Article 6.2 and 3, dealing with the editorial independence, is very important for journalists. We all know that. Again, the wording will show if it's enough or not. Conflict of interest, we've had it all along, and we still have it again and again, and so this is also a very important article for us. The independence of the board is important, and we're also looking forward to cooperation. We already get an invitation, thank you very much, because the so-called consultancy mechanisms, I think it's called, will be, of course, very important for us to also feel a bit accountable for the work you are doing. And since this is beyond ERGA in the audiovisual, it will be very important to, of course, include also other stakeholders, also civil society and academia, I believe. Last point, before I give the floor to Julie, is, of course, Article 18, which deals with this big elephant in the room. You mentioned them too, the big platforms, who are, in our view, too powerful on everything, and who at least now, there is a certain media exemption for media that show that they are transparent, that show that they apply ethical and self-regulatory standards. This is still a lot of work, and I think the Commission will be working on guidance there, because it is indeed very complicated, but yet very important. We cannot have the platforms to be the final arbitrators of what content to remove and what not to remove in an already very asymmetrical power relationship. So these are all important points to start with, and I'm sure the debate will go on. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie, I think I'll keep it simple. We'll just give her view from the Reporters Without Borders.
Okay. Does it work? Yes? Good. Well, I'm not going to repeat what has been said by almost all speakers, which mean that, yes, the EMFA is very welcome. It was very important to have such legislation, the first legislation at EU level on media freedom. And yes, its implementation will be key to show that it's not only words on a paper, but that it brings real changes. And for that, we need real political will and determination from national governments, but also from the European Commission and the Media Board. But at the same time, I also want to say, as Antoine, that key challenges still lie ahead in an AI-dominated environment, confronted with disinformation and unprecedented technological capacities to manipulate content. So the MFA will be essential in addressing important issues as editorial independence, ensuring fair and non-discriminatory allocation of state advertising, ensuring that media concentration doesn't undermine pluralism and editorial independence, but it doesn't take enough the disruptive power of artificial intelligence in the information space. So it means that the dissemination of information is left in the hand of a few platforms and social networks. And we know that algorithmic recommender system prioritize advertising revenues and user engagement over quality. So they amplify polarizing, divisive, and sensationalist content, and they push reliable media content to the margin. And the EMFA article, like Renate said, establish a system which, give a favorable treatment for media content, but to our point of view, it's a symptomatic treatment, and we need a structural change. Because disinformation, the danger of disinformation is that it discredits the entire information and communication space. Fake news discredit all information, including reliable journalistic information. It blurs the line, it muddies the waters until there is no longer facts, but only emotion, opinions, and alternative truths. So we want to reverse this logic and to restore public trust in the media. And we believe that the best way to do that is to have a legal obligation on platforms to amplify, give more visibility to news and information content.
Thanks, Julie. Finally, Wouter, from the European Broadcasting Union, what's your take on the EMFA and what it changes for your constituents?
I can give you the long version or the very short version.
The short version.
Start with the short version, because the beauty of coming last is that all the other people were great ambassadors for this act. I think if there's one thing I am personally convinced of, is that we cannot afford not to find it significant. If there's the slightest potential that we can see all together to make a difference in one member state, then this act is definitely worth it. I mean, European Broadcasting Union has from the outset supported the initiative, also supported a broad scope of all type of journalists and media being covered. And its importance can probably lie in broadly speaking, two issues. When a journalist goes to work on a day-to-day basis, he needs or she needs the protections that are needed from surveillance, from the sources being hampered with, absolutely. But he also needs to, or she needs to count on protections for the media company that actually hosts the journalist as such. And there, some of the principles safeguarding independence of media companies, and particularly public service media companies, will play their role. Not because the principles as such are new, but they are now in an EU law that can be used by advocates of all types, including the EBU, but also journalist federations, to go and speak to the Commission itself, but also speak to the governments, saying this is now a principle in EU law. It means it is serious business. It was serious business in the past, but it will give you additional leverage to make your case. Principles such as adequate, sustainable, and predictable funding for public service media seems quite vague notions, but actually in practice are incredibly important to safeguard independence on the work floor of journalists and media professionals. Second of all,
journalists do not only work in media companies and need structures in place that safeguard independence and safety, they also go online. They create great stuff. They use social media, but they also produce content that ends up on all kind of connected devices, interfaces. So I'm very happy that the Media Freedom Act also looked into that aspect, and many of you know it because we have been lobbying also very hard as an association together with others to get it. When journalists are producing that content, they're not out there to sell a hotel room, they're not out there to sell a piece of textile. There's a great online sales platform, a range of platforms to do that, but that also calls that we needed those safeguards in a media law. We're talking about very tangible things, and every week we see examples of it, of journalists' accounts being scrapped by big tech platforms for reasons that are not always clear. So we have at least a procedure, a new procedure. We'll see whether it will cure all the problems that we have with it, but it's a good start to open a communication line with big tech and make sure it's viewed as an important piece of legislation. There's also a question of when the people are consulting or accessing journalist content, are they always aware where it comes from? Who is the responsible media and responsible journalist behind it? It's again not an abstract problem, it is a concrete problem. So we're also happy that there is a tool in there in the Media Freedom Act that really will secure that the public can ask that the media responsible for the journalistic content is actually easily identifiable. And lastly, for instance, also audience measurement, a very piece of the puzzle. I mean, we had a big discussion in the digital market sector around access to the data, which serves all business users of platforms, of course. But there's also a particular issue with audience measurement online. Are media companies well aware enough about what happens when content actually travels on third-party platforms? We firmly believe no, and we're not on our own to do so. So we're also looking forward to the guidance that the Commission has to offer to make sure there's also meaningful progress being done. So independence of media, safety of a journalist, but also do not forget the online digital pillar, because the Digital Markets and Digital Services Act will not cure everything, every issue that journalists or media have with big tech platforms. So, and that will also require more work in the future, but happy to kind of take the discussion from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Wouter. I think as the audience realized, the speakers gave far more than just a few opening remarks. So that gives me freedom to maybe dig a bit deeper in a second round of questions. I have a question which actually concerns both Dr. Nicolai and Frederick Bokobza regarding the articulation between DG Connect and this new European Board of Media Services, and particularly the question of how you balance and articulate between providing opinions, as I think the board will do, on definite cases, and the role of guardian of the treaties that Dr. Nicolai mentioned. How in practice do you think that's going to work? If you give me some initial ideas. Of course, I realize that a lot will be determined by precedent, but how do you think it will work in practice at this stage?
I will answer to the question, but I want to kind of comment on a little bit on what we heard, because I think it's not to be underestimated that we really need to look at the whole kind of landscape of digital rules that we have. So to Julie's point, very relevant, but you know, when we look at the algorithmic systems and the recommender systems as they are today, you know, our effective enforcement of the DSA over time will really change that. When you look at the enforcement actions that we have taken, for instance, regarding X and Meta recently, when it comes to election integrity, which is one of our enforcement priorities, obviously in light of the upcoming European Parliament elections. They were in particularly also about the kind of the recommender systems and, you know, the algorithmic transparency. So, you know, as you know, the DSA is content agnostic. It's about the systemic risks, but it is a very powerful tool to really tidy up the system of the platforms as we see it today. And I'm sure with the enforcement actions that we will continue to take, that will make a difference on the ground, so that some of the kind of issues about having access, fuller access, and the prominence we will be discussing that probably also when we are looking at the revision of the Audiovisual Services Directive in the next mandate. All that we will have to look at the things in the kind of the context of the plurality also of the rules that we have now, where EMFA is an important bastion, of course, giving the kind of key pillars of what we need for a sustainable media sector. On the cooperation, I'm very positive about this because I really believe in Team Europe approach at all levels. I think we live it at the moment with the DSA very well already, and the sword that we have kind of created with the board to be able to have these opinions, to really kind of inject a little bit of a peer pressure. Opinions are not legally binding, as we know, but they are amongst peers, and they can kind of, point to deficiencies. That will be from independent kind of sources. The independent authorities can be very powerful. And that is an important source for us, potentially, as guardians of the treaties to work on. So I don't see us interfering at all in that work with the opinion. We will be in the Secretariat. We will kind of course, also have a dialogue with the board. But I see it really as a huge chance for the independent members in the board to really be driven by the objectives of the EMFA, which is to support a sustainable media sector in Europe with the plurality that it entails, and to really play their cards well. So I don't see any difficulties here.
Thank you, Renate. I would say I agree with what you said, and I can also testify as also a member of the DSA board that is now starting operation, that, yeah, we see this approach of Team Europe, the way you described it. So now in the EMFA context, well, first, we have, guarantees in the text itself. I mean, it's written very clearly that the Secretariat shall be provided by the Commission, and that it shall take action on the sole instructions of the board regarding the tasks under the regulation. So that's something very clear. And so, well, I don't have any doubts about the fact that it will be this way. And of course, we're looking forward to engage discussions very concretely with our Commission colleagues on the Secretariat, the resources that will be put there, because that will be instrumental, of course, in our ability to be efficient. We will need the Secretariat and to have really, strong resources there. But as the independence, as far as the independence is concerned, yeah, we will, I'm sure, both work as written by the text, so I have no doubts about it. And of course, I mean, as independent regulators at the national level, we are always and we will always be very vigilant on this item. If you allow me, since I have the floor, to expand a bit about, well, the press, because Renate on my left addressed the fact that, yeah, there is a press now in scope, of course, and it could not be the case in the European Media Freedom Act. And that's also for us, currently ERGA and in the future board, a big change. And I mean, there's no point denying this, because until now, most of ERGA members, if not all, are only audiovisual regulators when it comes to media. And actually, we will remain only audiovisual regulators and not press regulators. There is no such thing, thank God, as press regulation in EMFA. I mean, there have been some, fantasies in the course of the debates, but I mean, I think we're all clear on this. There is no press regulation. Press will remain self-regulated as is now, but there will be some cases, and which are fully relevant in our view, where the board indeed will have to look beyond pure audiovisual media, but also look at radio and look at the press when dealing with, well, cross-media questions. Typical example, a concentration case. Well, it's relevant to look at audiovisual, radio, press in all their forms. Otherwise, you miss a big part of the picture and of the assessment. And the same goes for other examples. So, yeah, we are completely aware of this change for us. It's not regulation, it's new kind of task for us. We are aware that it's important for the future landscape. And we also, that's why also we are very keen in engaging already now in exchanges, dialogue with all these, well, I would call them for us new stakeholders, very important stakeholders. So it starts with press, companies, with journalists, civil society, of course. Well, we already talked to them, but it's in a new context now, academia for sure. So all these players, we will be in touch with them. There's also an article mandating us to some extent to do so, but certainly we will do it anyway, and we think it's crucial to be relevant in this new setting. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Frederick. Some of you may have heard that we're entering an electoral period on Sunday, and one of the questions I think many people are wondering is what, if any, effect could the elections have on the implementation of EMFA going forward? What impact could the elections have on the rollout and implementation? I'm not sure if any of you have any opinions on this.
Yes, we all talked about the political will. We all know how important that is. I mentioned before that we are, I think most of us here in the room, in the same boat, that we are concerned of a potential shift to the extreme sides of the political spectrum, who may be less interested in the Team Europe, who may be less interested in media freedom and all what we said, in the rule of law. And as in the end a lot is political, including enforcement and including taking things very seriously, unfortunately we have had it in the past. I personally think, and I remember when Hungary took over the EU presidency, at the same moment when they took over a bit of media, and we as Journalist Federation really rang the alarm bell, and there was not much interest from the Commission because Fidesz was part of EPP. We are now, and I'm very honest, we know very much that the President of the European Commission at the moment is playing, in my mind, a dangerous game with some parties, and I'm not getting into details. But during my mission in Italy, I heard that already, because on the one hand, people said, we need the EMFA urgently for our problems we face in Italy. Their only hope was the EMFA. We heard it so often. They asked for webinars to get more training on the EMFA. And at the same time, there was a worry that the Commission will not take it seriously enough. There won't be any sanctions. So, yes. And I'm sure everybody here in the room from the Commission agrees that we need enforcement, we need the potential sanctions, otherwise some member states will not move. But what can we do? It's not an easy one. One thing, and then exactly I give the floor to Renate, is of course, and that's what we will do, is to empower our members at national ground and show them, if this is not working, you go to the national court, because this will be national law. And I think that will be very important. But if you say something additional.
Well, I mean, who am I to say something about certain outcomes? This is a feast of democracy that we are having in the next days, and we have to respect the outcome. But on the other hand, I can't see how all the work that we've been doing with EMFA, with the bringing order into the digital kind of, platform reality, to defend our democracy, to kind of support the media sector as such, that this will go away. I really can't think of any scenario where, whoever is going to be president-elect in a couple of days' time will not, in order to sustain a majority support in the next council and the council end of June and in the next parliament, will not have a very strong narrative on continuing this defense of democracy that is embedded in everything that we do with our digital rulebook.
Would anyone else like to react?
Yes, we can talk about the elections, but I think that the coming year generally will be very important to kind of assess the initial value of the Media Freedom Act. I can only say that for an organization like the EBU, who faces also an Article 5, not faces, but who benefits from an Article 5 with concrete independence principles for public service media was already 3 times or 4 times solicited by people in national member states, by a broadcaster that faces certain pressures. So there is a sign there that there is really a lot of potential with the new tool, not because we invented the principles, they were always there. But as Renate hints, it's not just about, okay, you need, of course, the stick to kind of incentivize governments, but there is also having the value of e-regulation is you can go to national courts too. So at every step of the way, there will be a negotiation, and you have a new tool, a new standard that you can use. So I'd like to be a bit more optimistic, because there's so many opportunities to be pessimistic, and I know I'm not naive in this, but I do hope that for some of the articles of the EMFA, we can actually make a difference in some cases. I'm not naive. In some member states, the situation is serious when it comes to rule of law, respect for rule of law, and it will, of course, not be wiped away with just one new EU law. But it is an important, significant milestone, and ahead of the application date, there's a lot of stock taking and action, foremost action we can already take in member states. And let me also clarify, this is not just an issue of East Europe, Western Europe. I think there's various shapes of threats, but the threats can be everywhere. As I said at the beginning, for public service media, the threats can start with serious underfunding. Create a dependency year into year of consistently underfunding a public service media. Usually that's already a sign. And that's not just an economic sign, it can also lead to more serious steps. So I'm quite hopeful that we can use some of those principles to make an actual difference.
Thank you very much. I think that we should now open up the floor, because I know many of you have, hopefully this panel discussion has prompted lots of questions in your mind, and perhaps you came with questions. So without further ado, I invite you to come and ask your questions. The only thing I ask you to do is perhaps give your name and institution before you ask the question, and I believe Jesse has a portable mic that he's going to give you. And Jesse, there's a sound of static in the background. Is there anything we can do about this?
I can see if I can adjust it.
Thanks. So please give your name and institution. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Mathieu Paulet from Politico. I'm a reporter at Politico. One question for the Commission, if I may. So you've all discussed the game changer potential of EMFA, but is the Commission powerless until it actually kicks off? And how do you plan to address, let's say, the worrying trends we see? So we've talked about Italy. There's obviously Slovakia. How do you plan to address them in the meantime until it kicks off? Because, as you probably know, damage to press freedom and independence is really hard to undo once it's done. Thank you.
We're just in the final stretch in the Commission of this year's edition of the Rule of Law report. That has been an important development in this Commission, that we kind of, take every year a state of play on the rule of law. And, it was important from the outset, from the genesis of the Rule of Law report, to have an important chapter on media freedom and media pluralism. And this has seen also over the years quite some significant expansion, for instance, when it comes to public service media, for instance. Also when it comes to, the recommendations which were introduced last year, as you remember. So that will be an important kind of moment, a rendezvous, to kind of see, building also on all the input from the Media Pluralism Monitor, from Reporters Without Borders, kind of, evidence on how we, put the situation on media pluralism and media freedom in our 27 member states in that regard. I would also say that the whole kind of, potential new procedure that we will have between media and online platforms, the Article 17 solution that we found in the EMFA, I think we are already kind of seeing a little bit of that in our daily kind of work in the machine room of the DSA enforcement, where I am. That, this is taken into account a little bit, So, for instance, now in the intensive work that I'm engaged in the last couple of weeks on election integrity, you know, where we kind of used all the kind of different players, you know, of course the DSA with our enforcement power, but also the kind of, you know, code of practice against disinformation with the ETMO fact checkers, the work with the media, you know, that really the kind of the flagging system kind of really works well. And here the flagging also from media has really had a taming effect on disinformation that is there, but had a taming effect on disinformation to expand immensely. There's no reason to be complacent, don't get me wrong, but I think, you know, so that's a little bit already a kind of, you know, an awareness building for that very privileged relationship that we will, you know, have once the EMFA is into force. But, you know, otherwise we simply kind of continue to be strong enforcers of the DSA rules, which can kind of, you know, tame disinformation. What we also heard is a real challenge for media, and be strong on the rule of law report.
Would like to ask a question. Ask the lady here first.
It's good to be a woman sometimes. Yeah, I wonder, we've been discussing about... Sorry? Present myself, I'm sorry. Yes, my name is Hannah Möllers. I come from the Deutsche Journalistenverband, the German Federation of Journalists, a union. And my question is, we've been already discussing a lot about the problem we're facing with social media, and I think this is like the problem laying ahead of us. And I wonder, because we were asking how to challenge the future, the problems lying ahead, and I wonder if we need a different view on competition, because I think it's a quite unfair competition here. They call themselves a platform, but they call themselves as well social media, but they're not treated as media. For example, we have to fulfill a lot of duties as journalists. For example, we are reliable. If we spread something that is wrong, we are reliable for that. We have to have, in Germany at least, a certain amount of news that we're obliged to have. We have to pay, like a newspaper, it has to pay their workers, and they have to follow working laws. So all these criteria that don't, they're not applied to the social media platforms, and I think it's kind of an unfair competition. And maybe we should address this, or is EMFA maybe already addressing it in a part, for example, Article 21.
Very much. Here, Tom Gibson.
Hello, Tom Gibson from the Committee to Protect Journalists. I have a quick question for the Commission. I think if we wait for the rule of law report on Slovakia, I think it's going to be too late. I think the direction of travel is seriously concerning. I also have concerns about whether or not the European Media Freedom Act can actually be used, given the draft legislation both on access to information and the draft bill on the media law, the amendments to the media law, as well as the public service broadcaster bill. Surely this is a question about expanding conditionality of funds. That's where things have to go with the next term, isn't it? That's where that you're going to apply pressure on Robert Fico.
I think there are quite a few questions already on the table before we open up to another round of questions of competition and conditionality. I'm not sure who wants to take these questions.
I can maybe start on Slovakia. You might know very well that there have been, you know, contacts there on the draft bill. There have been also changes following these contacts. I think we have in this mandate, we can be very proud of the budget conditionality that we kind of, you know, developed. I think it has proven a very useful tool in the context where we have applied it. And I would not, you know, close the door to it being applied also in other contexts. And it's not impossible to kind of, you know, take into account also a media context. But there's one condition. It has to have an effect on the financial kind of, you know, aspects. So that was the kind of, you know, that you cannot negotiate away. It's not a rule of law tool. It's kind of, you know, a tool that kind of is based on the financial interests of the EU. And that simply has to be taken into account. If you kind of find a link to that, then this isn't impossible. On the broader question of Hannah Möller, if I may, I think there are really, in my view, I mean, you have heard me saying it's important to be coherent with all the rules that we have and apply and enforce them effectively, and I stand by that every day. But on the other hand, of course, we heard it also in the debate, there are challenges that we have to address. There is a fairness challenge, you know, that we have to look into, whether in the AI Act we got the kind of, you know, the fairness on the contribution, you know, for instance, for generative AI, you know, with the text and data mining exemption, whether that is in the long run the only kind of way to ensure that fairness. So in the next mandate, there will be, you know, at least there will have to be an evaluation of the copyright directive. So we will probably have to take that into account. Also, you know, you look at the whole kind of area of online advertisement. There are very good kind of possibilities for us in the DSA to push also there. But also when you take into account that there will be an evaluation on the audiovisual services directive, you know, could there be a debate on online advertising a bit more with a long-term sustainability kind of, you know, aspect that takes into account also competition aspects in the single market. So, you know, I'm not kind of saying we are helpless. I think we have really, as also our Vice President has said, we have done a lot in this mandate that we can be proud of, and that we now have to show it has an impact in effective enforcement. But this technological revolution is so fast, especially since, you know, ChatGPT moment, and that was when we had already the EMFA out and when we had even our AI Act out. Let's not forget, this is super, super, super fast development. So we really, of course, have to keep on our toes to kind of make sure whether we can kind of, you know, with guidelines, clarify things further, or whether we can use the built-in evaluation processes that are coming our way in the next mandate, use that to kind of adjust things to make it even fairer.
Thank you very much. I think Frederick also wants to respond.
Just a short one on the question of social media and all the questions and problems it raises vis-à-vis media. I would just mention, coming back to EMFA, that, okay, we have this provision everyone has in its mind on Article 18 on the treatment of media content on platforms. I don't come back to it. And then there's Article 19, which maybe was a bit less discussed, which is this structured dialogue that the future board will be in charge of with media, the platforms, and other stakeholders, civil society in general, academia. And we also believe that this has potential really to dig in these specific problems to media on online platforms. And we see it as also complementary to the DSA in that sense that we will be able in this forum to really have these discussions on specifics of media problems on these platforms, and then we can report also our analysis of this to the board, for instance, which can then treat them where applicable under the systemic risks or with the very powerful tool that are then enshrined in the DSA. So there's also this one on which we want to play our role. Of course, this will be a collective game, right? But so we've seen this. Thanks.
Okay, another round of questions. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Valeria Ronzitti, maybe the only one not belonging to the world of media and journalism. But I think is an added value because I'm here also to say that your issues are very important beyond media and journalism. I represent two organizations today. SGI Europe is the organization defending public services at European level. EBU is a member. And of course, we see media as a common good. My question to Wouter and maybe the others too is what can we do better to insert the issue of funding of public services in the next strategic agenda? What you mentioned, underfunding in public services, is something that affects not only media, but many other public services. The difference with you is that there is a link with democracy, so the democracy is linking. But I also represent the European Movement International, which is an NGO and an organization that is there to defend rule of law and democracy. And as European Movement International, without knowing about your activities, we had already written to Commissioner Jourova to raise attention on the case of Italy. So if I hear the conversation correctly, I'm not as expert as you, I think the best thing we can do until August 2025 is to push to have a reference to Italy in the next rule of law report. But what can we do beyond this? I heard at the very beginning the proposal to have a right of citizens to information, and I would like to know more if you are thinking to launch a citizens initiative in this regard, because this could be something on which the European Movement International can help if you want.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's a young lady who'll take the mic from you. Let's take another question before we go back to the panel. Here, there's a lady here.
Hi, this is Sarah Brandstetter. I'm a tech reporter at MLEX here in Brussels. And so nearly every one of you mentioned AI now. So my question is there anything specific, some guidelines that the Commission is working on right now? And can you give us some more specifics on this? Thanks.
Okay, I think let's take those questions. There's quite a few already from the lady over there. I'm not sure if anyone wants to respond.
Just because there was one on funding, and funding of public service media obviously is primarily a national competence. So even though we have now clear principles that say that national authorities need to have procedures in place that secure the adequate sustainable and predictable funding, the law doesn't identify amounts, of course. And I think rightly so, that was margin left to the member states, because it would also be quite artificial to kind of impose any budgets. But we would obviously advocate as an association defending the interests of public service media that once you establish a robust remit, that with the public financing that a public service media gets, it will tick all the boxes of diverse news-making, opinion-making, reaching out to as many audience as possible, to reach the different target groups. That commitment to be delivered within 3, 4, 5 years comes with the necessary guarantee that the public media company that need to do that needs to have the financial stability over the same period of time, stretching over 3 or 4 years to do so. The reality these days is often that the remits are set for a number of years by national governments and regulators, but that the funding is often to be negotiated every year or ad hoc. And that is, of course, creating a bit of a precarious situation, to kind of say the least. And that is something, of course, we can, where the EMFA can help. And it's stated also in some of the opinions, the provision is there to help to tackle the problem of underfunding of public service media, because that leads to problems with independence. So, but there is limits, of course, as what we can do on the funding issue. But your first point is spot on. Media is indeed a public good, and there is many reasons to kind of really more than ever believe in it, and also keep that in mind as we further fine-tune the next instruments, Audiovisual Media Service Directive and the likes.
Do anyone else want to answer these questions that were raised?
Maybe on the follow-up to the AI Act, there's going to be a very intense workflow immediately, also even before this, is becoming directly applicable, to really make sure that, there's a lot of kind of, areas where code of conducts are being developed and also guidance is being given, including also on an aspect that is quite important for this audience here, which is the text and data mining exemption, where there's a reference to the copyright directive and the opt-out, which is a right under the copyright directive, but where it's of course important that the generative AI kind of, entrepreneur gives the information, and about that kind of, filling that with life, that respective passage of the AI Act. There's also going to be immediate follow-up work. In that context, I think we're observing, of course, at the moment also, and all that will be very important input for, as I said, the evaluation that we will anyway have to start preparing for the next mandate. We are observing the licensing arrangements that are being kind of made by some very big AI players and publishing houses. And of course, also experience will show, and also, input from journalists will kind of, be very relevant in that, how much that triggers down also in fair remuneration for journalists. So I think there's a lot going on. There's a licensing kind of reality that we are observing with generative AI, and there's concrete follow-up action from the AI Act.
Thank you. Take some more questions now. Yes.
Yes, thank you. I'm Charlotte Michiels. I'm General Secretary on behalf of the Flemish and Belgian Association of Journalists. It's less top of mind than EMFA, of course, but you referred several times to the rule of law report. It's a soft mechanism. I was just wondering, is its ambition simply to have a state of play yearly or to confront governments with incongruences which were actually told in the years before? Yeah.
Thanks. I think the lady also in front just had a question, no? The lady in blue shirt.
Yes, hello, hi, I'm Aura from News Media Europe. You partly answered my question, Renate. I wanted to ask what will be the recommendation from the services of DG Connect to the new Commission about fair remuneration of press publishers by AI companies, because the current system is far from perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, we're in the market for ideas at the moment, as a lot of DGs are developing ideas. I think on the rule of law report, I think it really became necessary a couple of years ago to do something for the EU at large, because as we heard here also, issues can arise wherever, and that's why. And there's also a question of fair treatment and equal treatment, and there's an issue about learning from each other and identifying, there isn't a system that's perfect. And I think the rule of law report really had that huge educational aspect of really bringing a debate. I mean, I was still head of cabinet of Madame Jourova when we launched it, and the General Affairs Council before never had debates about rule of law in different member states, and we had these moments regularly where we would certain kind of, member states' rule of law reports and discuss them. But why not discussing that? We have Article 2 in the treaty. We are bound by rule of law. So we should not kind of, disregard that. We have kind of, discussions in the ECFIN all the time about our macroeconomic performance. It was high time to have discussions about our rule of law performance. So I wouldn't say that this is only, not even worth the paper it's written on. It has an effect when you're all of a sudden on the spot and people are all kind of looking. It also had an effect nationally because there were debates in the national parliaments, and let's face reality, justice reforms, for instance, have to be done at the national level. They have to be done with the support of national parliaments. And that's why you need to bring the debate away from the Brussels bubble only, so to say, to the national kind of debates. For that, it was also helpful. So I really think it was an important kind of also important step towards, a more conscious discussion in the EU on rule of law, which is even more important when you now think of, where we are now with the really a life enlargement kind of perspectives, for partners in the Western Balkans, for Ukraine. And there it will be really, really important that, all these reforms that need to be done in order to be a full-fledged kind of, member also in terms of the rule of law requirements are done well before. And also to be credible on this, we had to show that we get our own house in order internally. So I would think it was a very, very important exercise to really have a more informed debate. And it has, last point, been a very important basis for infringement actions that have been taken by this Commission, in particular with regard to justice reforms or justice kind of, actions in some of the member states or other kind of, issues. I mean, you have probably followed those.
Thank you very much. I'll give the floor now to Emma from the European Partnership for Democracy.
Thank you. I wouldn't need to introduce myself. I just wanted to follow up on the point that you made about the sort of replication of this regulation in the Western Balkans. There's a lot of new media regulation in the region right now, and the EU is having considerable issues making sure that these regulations are being implemented. Now, my question is, if we are facing these huge issues in these countries where the EU does have a lot of financial sway, how can we make sure that with the implementation of EMFA, if there are member states that do not implement the regulation, how can that be ensured?
Okay, maybe let's take another question before we... there's a gentleman there at the back who shouldn't be forgotten.
Thank you.
Frankie. I'm the chair of the Belgian regulator for media and former chair of ERGA. I mean, let us take stock, like my colleagues did, about all the actions that have been taken by the Commission so far. I mean, in a few days we're going to vote, and the action that has been taken by this Commission is really tremendous in the media sector, and I want to acknowledge that as well, although we've had our differences, and we still have them, but we've got to really take stock of that. And but I would like to touch on a thing that has been touched also by the lady there and by Water about the sustainability of the media sector in general. I mean, the biggest threat to media freedom is actually poor journalists and the social status of journalists. If you've got poor journalists, you've got poor news, and you've got a poor democracy. And I'm really wondering. I mean, we've got in Europe a great system to help our cultural industries. Article 13 of the VMS directive. Would the Commission consider such a system in order to protect trustworthy news and news companies, in order to help them to thrive, and in order to have to allow them to have the possibility to have a fair share of especially advertising, for example, the advertising market. And I think that should be really high on the agenda of the next Commission.
That's powerful. Thank you very much. Didn't realize we had the former chair of ERGA in the room. Thank you very much for that insightful question. So we have two questions. Do you want to take a third, or are you ready to answer those two questions? Perhaps. Poor Renata.
On the Balkans, I'm dealing a lot with them on the media side, and they are, most of them, very worried about disinformation campaigns, for instance, because they are easy targets for Russian propaganda, for instance. So there is actually a real momentum to help them. It's not, they are not all the same. I'm not spelling out anyone now, but you know what I mean. But nevertheless, I think we have a huge momentum here to kind of building on what we have done together, DSA, EMFA and everything, to really kind of help them to move in the right direction. Will that kind of, be something that we can point to with our member states? Maybe, I mean, we will be tough enforcers, as we are, and that's our role. That's to be the guardian of the treaty or in general. But I think, the points that you made, Corinne, I think they are so relevant. I try to cover that. Online advertisement. Have we got it right on the kind of the fair remuneration in our kind of, rights kind of system, copyright? Given the context, given kind of, the Gen AI revolution, given the kind of, the political kind of, weight of the social media when it comes to advertising markets. I think these are debates that we need to have. And I mean, we will have in the next mandate a huge debate on the next kind of, budget. And also there, I mean, I think it's, media has been popping up, a lot. We have been dealing with pilot projects. Maybe it's time to find a different, more sustainable kind of, basis for what we all want, a sustainable media sector also from that angle. So I think it's in a very appropriate kind of, debate that we should engage in.
Renata, you want to add something as representative of journalists?
Yes. Thank you, Karim, for putting this to the heart of our discussion as well. I make now a bit of publicity because we put out some copies of our Stand Up for Journalism manifesto. Journalism is a public good, in which we have 3 points, actually, also for the next commission to deal with, besides, of course, the enforcement of EMFA and all the rest. And the first is viability. Of course, without journalism is expensive, and without money there is no journalism. We all know that. And part of the viability is different ways of funding, public, private, philanthropic, what have you, of course, always at arm's length. We know the Commission cannot do it. It has to be done at national level, but to engage in the discussion and the dialogue and continue that, I think it will be very important. Of course, also big tech, be it taxing big tech, sounds maybe a bit, there are ways. I know also RSF put it in their manifesto. We have to think about that more. We also have the question of safety of journalism, of course. And the third point in our manifesto is the question of regulating artificial intelligence, and so very hence in the discussion we are leading now. Thank you.
I don't want to be accused of favoring Renata's, so I want to give the floor to Antoine, who wants to react to this manifesto.
Your manifesto, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I just want to thank Karimi Boki too, because that really, I'm sorry, Renate and Frederick, it's not so comfortable. But yeah, thank you. Indeed, RSF did put this in its 12 measures manifesto for a new deal for the right to information in Europe. We make the comparison with cultural exception and call for the creation of an informational exception, justifying that indeed information is not any type of good, and that it does justify that type of regime that goes beyond preventing damage, preventing the realization of risks, but proactive measures that we see, and you referred to a number of fields where we see that only preventing risk is not enough. We know it's necessary, and frankly, we at RSF trust and want to believe in what you said, that actual measures for the implementation of DSA will, quote you said, huh, impact behaviors, platforms' behaviors. However, wouldn't we feel much more better, our democracies, if we had proactive measures in place, not only symptomatic treatment of prevention of symptoms, but systemic measures to actually support what is happening every day, which is so badly happening every day. So that's the idea. We're in a way, quite joining the messages here with EFJ. We knew, we had discussed it a lot when we drafted our manifestos, conveying our joint message, in fact. But we understand that this is really widely shared. Thanks.
If I just allow me 1 second. No, just one thing in terms of whatever exception, but the new Dutch government took over within a few days. What did they do? They increased the VAT from 9% to 21%, and you can imagine what impact that has specifically on local media in the Netherlands, which so far has been doing quite well when it comes to pluralism. Sorry.
Okay, maybe we'll take a final round of questions, take 3 questions. We have someone who hasn't asked a question yet. Okay, then Tom, go ahead.
I have a question for Renata from EFJ. How do you see the relationship? I mean, what would you hope to get out of the relationship between civil society and the board? And also another question. We have very well-intentioned pieces of EU legislation like the Whistleblowers Directive and GDPR that when they've actually been implemented have been problematic. How are we going to be able to work around that given the resources and scope that we have as civil society? And is there a role for the Florence Centre?
Please, Renata, go ahead if you want to. No one else seems to be asking to respond. So.
Yeah, very good question, Tom. Well, first of all, I may have not said it enough. I think the lobbying around the EMFA, we would not have been able to be as efficient only among media freedom groups. We did that together with civil society organizations. Some of them are online. EPD is here, and digital rights organizations. And I think for me it was for the first time. I've been here for over 30 years, and before, I'm very honest, working with civil society was very tedious, and you needed a lot of patience, which I lack. This has completely changed, and that probably because of the situation we are all in, and we all realize without journalism, no democracy and all that. So that even shows how important the cooperation is with civil society. In civil society, also organizations like Article 19 have been incredibly important. Also, you know, Renate, when it comes to the DSA, when it comes to insisting on recommender system, to transparency of algorithms, all these common goods. And that's why I'm very happy that Frédéric mentioned also Article 19, the structured dialogue with civil society and academics. We have to see how that will work, and we also want some transparency. I'm personally not following that much the DSA, so I'm not sure if the transparency aspect is well done. I heard some rumors that it wasn't, but I think this will be very, very important. This was question number 1, and I forgot question number 2. Huh? Yeah, implementation, very important. Again, both enforcement, who is responsible for what. There are some articles we do not know yet who will be responsible, because it will not be the board. So, and this will be different at every national level. So we would like to have guidance on that, transparency in terms of who is responsible, what is being done in the different languages. I don't know. I know also the Commission has very limited resources, so in how far they can help there, or at national level, the EU delegation, if they can help. Unfortunately, so again, I'm putting my question a little bit to poor Renate, but it will be crucial for all of us to feel satisfied with the process.
As I have also passed in the GDPR, I would like to come in on that. I think when you look at how enforcement has developed over the last kind of years, then there is certainly a shift in perspective. Whereas on GDPR, for instance, it was clear it would be decentralized kind of, implementation and enforcement, and it has had some kind of, feeling that it wasn't fast enough, and it wasn't the effective enforcement that everybody had dreamed of. And when you look at what happened in the newer, maybe one can describe them as second generation of digital rules, like the DSA, the DMA, the AI Act, and I would put EMFA in that basket. It's a different setup of enforcement. It's not, that it's totally, either you have a two-layer to put, the letter report kind of narrative in, you have a European layer and a national layer, or the board is also something new. It's not just erga, it's something new. It's really something where, and so I think this, we have all realized that we must deliver together. And so my anticipation of the next Commission is that, effective enforcement, and really to look at enforcement as, just another chapter of the rule-making kind of process. It's not done when it's in the official journal. That's when another chapter starts, and where also the collective engagement has to continue between the EU level and the national level with the stakeholders, because we're in this together, that this will be a guiding theme for everybody in the college, really. So I'm hopeful, but we will have to kind of keep on drumming also with the member states that we are not making it too easy for those who might, sit back and not do anything to get their act together to also fulfill their role in having this, the setup, for instance, on Article 4, protection of journalists, that's not the board. So there we will have to make sure that there are structures in national systems, that they have the bodies that you can turn to. So we will watch that, and we will have to be the watchdog, absolutely.
Any questions? No? Some people have been quiet all along. Don't be shy. Okay, since we're doing actually very good for time, unusual in panel discussions, I'm going to abuse my powers to ask a final question myself before we wrap up, and I can invite you to go enjoy the coffee, tea, and some pastries we have here for you. We've talked a lot about the fact that EMFA is actually part of a bigger ensemble of rules, regulations, and directives that have come out in recent years, and actually there are more in the pipeline. And one question that we asked ourselves in the preparatory meeting, that I asked myself, is have all these different pieces of legislation been thought through as a common whole, and what will the articulation be between them? I'm thinking, for example, you've mentioned the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, the upcoming Audiovisual Services Directive, EMFA. There's so many new regulatory frameworks which are out there. To what extent have they been thought through as a coherent ensemble, or if not, how will they be articulated with each other in the implementation phase?
I think the best recipe for that is to have it all on the DG Connect, because that's where they are. And that's where we have the coherence to kind of, do the cross kind of references and have the different kind of, pieces really kind of, talking to each other. And I can tell you from my work as Deputy Director General there, this is exactly what we are doing already now to kind of, make our contributions, when we have, which is happening a lot, when we have national initiatives, for instance, on minor protection online. To already now, and then the member states need, under the TRIS notification procedure, need to kind of, communicate that to us because we want to keep the single market, right? And so in these notification processes, it's important that, we have a common approach between what we read in the Digital Services Act and what we read in the Audiovisual Services, Media Services Directive. And that in one house is done easily. Or when I look at the AI Act negotiations, I mean, that was a massive kind of piece, but I think also there, the read across on, DSA, because who knows whether, a Gen AI actor cannot be a very large online platform under the DSA in the future, one question. Or also, how to read across the copyright approach with the AI Act. I think that was also helpful to kind of, have that negotiation. And as I said, I think we're really talking about the challenges, and this was so visible also in this discussion. Of course, there should be a debate about a right to information. We had this discussion, I referred to the Charter and Article 11, but, it's always good to kind of, keep on your toes and be pushed, so I like that. But on the other hand, it's the challenges we were discussing now are a lot in the digitalization. They are a lot linked to kind of the role of social media and journalism, the role of AI and journalism. So again, so I think one has to think this through together, from a defending democracy angle, but also from a digital transition angle that we want to embrace, but that we have to get right. So that's my answer to it.
Does anyone else want to react to that point about the articulation between all these different instruments?
There's definitely a very exciting reflection ahead of us to kind of clear out the exact relationship between all these rules. Our stance would be there is definitely a case for a strong media policy and law aspect in there, because in the past, the European Commission has also been sometimes streamlining and making regulations more lean. That has, of course, its assets. But I mean, when you talk about the media sector, when you talk about journalists, we would be kind of losing on both sides if we just limit the way we address big tech questions to a purely internal market or economic question. But I think that's quite clear from the outset. We have always been in there. In anticipating this discussion, what I could only welcome is that we continue to talk. I mean, over the past years, not only with the team internally here, and I want to thank them for them, because we talk to journalists, engineers, digital experts every week. Tell us what's on your mind. And I want to debunk a bit the fact that we're always perceiving EU laws as too little, too late. I think this is not correct. This is typically people talking, saying, not happy, so rules are always too late. I think these rules have allowed us, with our community, but also with civil society, to kind of come up with concrete questions, concrete issues they have. And in many cases, we managed to tie it to either a big tech rule that was in the making and for which we advocated the adoption. So I think in that next stage, that will be even more important. To give you one example, the team was fantastic the last few weeks to gather evidence on the way journalists' profiles and reputations are being abused to kind of sell financial services, to promote games. And that sits at the heart of media, of course, but it has to do with big tech rules. And I think we together as a community have that responsibility to continue to make the things tangible. Because the more we think, oh, it's out there in Brussels, but a lot of these rules tie in with daily concerns. So I hope, I mean, I know we already do work very closely together, but we continue to kind of exchange practices. And that we can then make good calls to Renate and the entire teams to kind of explain why strong media solutions are also needed in the future. Thank you.
Wouter, that's great, because that sounded kind of like closing remarks. Do they qualify as closing remarks? Yes? Yeah? Okay. I'm afraid we haven't heard much from Julia. I hope it's not because I couldn't pronounce your surname that you didn't say anything. But this is your chance to make closing remarks before we move on.
Yes. No, what I'd like to say is that I think we all agree here that information is a public good. And maybe we don't draw the consequences of saying that information is a public good. If it's a public good, as Antoine said, it could be also an information exception, which means that if it's a public good, it doesn't obey to the same rules as any other services or yes, private good. So I think that because it's not only the future of journalism that we are talking here, it's the future of our democratic societies. How are we can debate peacefully? So I think we really have to put this right to information, the right of every citizen to have reliable information as a priority for the next 5 years, and also to realize that AI has really a disruptive effect, and that we need to, or the Commission, the EU, really needs to continue taking initiative, in particular in the AI and information field, because there is not only, as we mentioned, the issue of the recommender system, which give priority to what is sensationals and disinformation, etc. But there's also generative AI with deepfakes, and there's a lot of issues that needs to be tackled to make sure that journalism and information survives, and that democracy also survive.
Thanks, Julia's powerful closing remarks. Renate, would you want to say something to close the discussion?
Very little. I just wanted to come back to the colleague from Politico who also asked that it's not too late. What can we do? What must be done? We are doing a lot of monitoring. That's actually also financed by the European Commission. And we did a lot of monitoring on Poland, but it was very difficult to do anything regarding the rule of law. And I'm not talking about Hungary now, because Poland also showed us that, yes, we were able to get a new government, but we also see now how difficult it is to decapture the situation, because there had been so much media capture. So it's not always enough to leave it to democratical processes to get it fixed again. It really shows how important procedures are by the European Commission, and I know also how difficult that is. That's the least to say.
Thanks, Renate. Please, Frédéric.
Yeah, maybe just to say that as ERGA, as the future board, we are really committed to making the implementation of EMFA a success. And while being here today for me was really very, very thrilling, because it's an occasion to really hear the expectations towards EMFA in general, but also towards the board, in the future board in particular, expectations, priorities, etc. And that's something we intend to do throughout the coming year, really be in listening mode, especially with the stakeholders that we are not so used to talking with, because that's what we intend to do for just performing our tasks well. So we intend to do this, and that was a perfect occasion. So we are getting ready already for this. I mean, on our internal procedures, etc. We have a nice working program for this year. We're working on that. And then this finally will require resources. I was happy that, Renate, you mentioned the discussions around budget. So don't forget the secretariat for the board, but I'm sure you won't, of course. That will be instrumental for us. And that's also true, by the way, at national level, because the individual members of the board, the national regulatory authorities, will have many more things to do, and for that they will need also, well, resources. So that's my final word. Sorry to finish with this money thing, but that's instrumental. Thanks again.
And finally, Dr. Nicolai, please.
Maybe just to, go back to what you said at the very beginning, that Europe has become a little bit of a representative of democracy these days. When I travel in my role, it's very remarkable to see how other countries are looking at Europe and how much they appreciate how we have developed these really fundamental pieces of legislation, and always in an approach that is human-centric, that is not censorship, that is content agnostic, that kind of doesn't change the rule of the game in a way. And so I think we should take that with us also in this debate. Not to be complacent, keep me on my toes, that's your job, but really also to be a little kind of assertive also as an EU, because we are quite a player in this kind of, race around what is the right approach to tech regulation? What is the right approach to AI in the systemic rivalry that we have in the geopolitics of today?
Thank you very much, Dr. Nicolai. I was hoping that ChatGPT could write my closing remarks for me, but I'm afraid I wasn't able to do that. But we dealt with a very complex and rich subject. My main key takeaway when I face the complexity of the issues is that at least we know that it's all being handled by DG Connect, and so we can all rest assured. But somehow I suspect that some of the players on this panel and in the room will make sure that even DG Connect, despite all of its competence and well-meaning, will still be, carefully checked and monitored going forward. But it's true, and that's why I think my executive director mentioned that in the first place. It's true that when you travel around the world, and especially when it comes to all these questions of how to handle social media, AI, new technologies, I think the EU is trying to chart a path between maybe an excessive faith in markets and, on the other hand, an excessive power of the state to control freedom of speech. And it's a very difficult path to chart. And of course, since it's a new field, it's difficult to get right. But I think that the democratic system is precisely designed to move by trial and error, to constantly being reflective on its own failures and constantly trying to improve itself. And I think that's what makes the strength of democracy in the end. It's not that we get things right immediately, but we're trying and we constantly improve on the mechanisms we have. And I think that the wealth of different instruments that have been developed recently are also an effort to try and constantly hone, improve what the mechanisms we have to try and regulate these new fields. I know that you didn't come here to listen to me, but mainly to have coffee and tea over there. So I will stop talking. I just want to thank our panelists. Whether they came from Paris or just down the road, they took the time to come and talk to you. And I think we had a very interesting, very enriching discussion. And I want to thank also the people who are not on the panel, but played a key role in making this happen. I'm thinking, of course, of Marie Frenet, of Anna Harolds, of Laurent Brier, Jesse Goldberg in the back. So, and of course, my fellow co-organizers, the European Federation of Journalists and Reporters Sans Frontières. And with these words, I bring this panel discussion to a close and invite you to have coffee and tea next door. Thank you.